And good morning, everybody.
Morning,
Back.
Ian.
Yeah, thank you, David. Appreciate that. We're here back looking at John. Of course, I've really enjoyed the entire book, but this morning we're moving deeper into chapter 13 and into what's called the Last Supper, and specifically the washing of the disciples' feet. And I have particularly enjoyed this. I think we got a couple of sessions. We started out last week verses 1 through 3, and now verses 4 and 5, and that are the bulk of it. And then we'll continue on from there. But let's review from last time. We explored the idea that as a person begins to embrace what they have been given, the whole idea here is that we have been given a great deal, and it's really hard for us humans to embrace that. It's really difficult for people to receive, just generally speaking. I think we learn to receive. We learn to receive what's true, and that's just part of being human. But to the degree that someone's able to embrace what they've been given, they will be able. They'll have a capacity to move from what they've created in their heads to what is actually true. And then I'm calling this being free from self. That's what I'm calling it. Being free from self is a segue into gaining the capacity to love others as Jesus demonstrated. And I think that is the end game. So here's verses 1 through 5. The portion that is in the white is what we looked at last week. And verses 4 and 5 is what we're going to look at this week. So before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, and Jesus, knowing that the Father had handed all things over to him, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God. Now we pick up in verse 4, right in the middle of a very long sentence. He got up from supper, and he laid his outer garment aside, and he took a towel, and he tied the towel around himself. Then he poured water into the basin, and he began washing the disciples' feet and wiping them with the towel which he had tied around himself. So I think we've all heard lots of sermons on this section, and I think it's a beautiful passage. And this, let's dive in. So in review from last time, verses 1 through 3, we looked at what Jesus knew. From the text, it says he knew his place of origin and he knew his place of destiny. I come from the Father and I'm returning to the Father. And I've bracketed that tandem acknowledgement into what I call safe place. Jesus, from my perspective, was operating 24/7 from a place of safety. And because of that place of safety, he knew where he was from, where he was going, from the Father to the Father. He could demonstrate love continually. What I'm proposing to us is that Jesus gave us an example, first of a perspective, and then a realization, safe place, and an application, which would be love continually. That is the manifestation from the way I'm thinking of what we believers in Christ should be demonstrating, or can be demonstrating. As a comprehensive framework, like a backdrop to everything, he knew, it says in verse 3, that everything had been given to him. That is a huge realization. Maybe easier for Jesus because he was God. I don't know. There's also, he's fully human. I don't know the answer to that. But the degree by which we can enter into that same type of thinking is the degree that we can be free from ourselves and actually extend the love of Christ to others around us. Now, how this relates to you and I, this is also review. We're our path is a bit different because we're not the person of Jesus. The end game is the same in my view, but the process by which we arrive there is a bit different. And so we looked at this slide last week. First of all, I think dwelling on our origin, how did we get here? How did anything get here is a really good idea. And what that dwelling will do, what that thinking about that will do, is that it will remind us that the fact that there is absolutely nothing that you and I have done in order for us to be here right now. It is all a gift. Everything has been given to us. That is healthy. Number two, dwelling on origin should lead me to a fuller appreciation of what I've been given. That's what I just stated. So then the next step is there's a two-part process to 3A and 3B. This then, it's kind of a logical sequence here. This then will lead me, this dwelling on origin will lead me to a more comprehensive understanding of my own safety. So here's the idea. If I can embrace the idea that I am here 100% outside of my own doing, that means my future in regard to safety is out of my hands, really. I mean, I am part of something much larger, and because of that, I really don't have much control over what is about to happen. That should, if we believe in a universe that is, a God who is loving and benevolent, it should lead us down a path of safety. If I possess a more comprehensive understanding of my own safety, it will lead me to a fuller understanding of my destiny. There's the logic. So it's origin first, then that should speak of safety, and safety should speak into my future. Notice it says, note the progression from safety to destiny. Really, guys, if we just dwell on it, the fact that I am here and exist because of someone else's doing, that should really start me down a healthy path. I'm now much more free of me in order to love continually, because I'm not trying to cover my own bases. And that's number 4 is the end game. I believe that we as believers in Jesus Christ are called into a love continually way of living. So this is 4 and 5. This is what I believe Jesus is demonstrating. And so let's dive into verses 4 and 5 and take it apart. 4a, he got up from supper. That's the first phrase. This action demonstrates life-giving intentionality. He perceives himself as safe. Rather than me commenting, let's see. Because he is safe, he is free from himself to act in a new and life-imparting ways. Conversely to that, if you and I are bound up in our own stuff, we are not free to act. The idea of getting up from supper is the idea that he is giving this supper, which actually occurred numerous times with the disciples. They didn't know this was the Last Supper. They considered a supper, but Jesus is free to act and give this supper an entirely different meaning. Thus, the text reads, he's able to induce something new into the dinner because he is free from himself. That is the meditation on that. What Jesus is about to do is unexpected by all. Through his action, the group experience will be steered into an entirely different life-imparting direction, new meaning for an existing supper. And Jesus is inducing that because he's free to act. It begins right here through him getting up from supper. Now, the next 4b, he laid his outer garments aside. You guys are all familiar with this, but we're slowing each phrase down. His next action is removal. He laid aside his garment. Symbolically, he can lay aside his garment because he is safe, he is free to remove his own garment. Now, I'm applying this in a spiritual sense, that the garment represents our covering. You know, what we have, for all human beings, we create garments. Notice, I got the note counter to Genesis chapter 3, where the man and the woman, after they moved into this place of self-induced guilt by disobeying God, the first thing they did was they created coverings for themselves, garments. And that's what we humans do throughout all generations. We create for ourselves garments to hide behind what we really are, because we don't feel safe. So in this case, Jesus is removing the outer garment, and through that he's demonstrating freedom. I just had a thought. I'm not into superheroes really at all, but there's a big. In fact, wasn't there a new Spider-Man movie that just came out, or Marvel movie? But the whole idea of superheroes is that they put something on that gives them superpowers. There is a putting something on, except for Superman. Superman is the only superhero that I know of that removes his outer garment in order to become a superhero. That's something to think about. Be a Superman. Only after the realization of safe place, as demonstrated in verse 1 through 3, can one remove their self-created and maintained outer garment. I think you've made the correlation. Without safe place, without a safe place, fellas, it's just too scary. If I believe in a God Almighty who's basically kind of torqued off all the time, and willing and waiting for me to step out of line so I can be put back into place, that is a really unfortunate view of God. And I believe it is absolutely not true that what we have created God to be. And it's scary. I must work out of a place of safety in order to be free enough for myself so I can extend the love of God through Christ to other people. Because it's too scary, we humans choose to remain dressed in our self-created garment, thus the beginning of that process as illustrated and demonstrated in Genesis chapter 3. Through the realization of safety, removal can occur, and only then. If I feel safe, I can remove what I have created, and that leads to safety, and that leads to freedom. We call this a letting go. Removal is like a full stop. Think of a full stop. This isn't a yield sign. This is a full stop. This is a stoplight. But, okay, I'm going to make another statement. So think of full stop as a removal. One must come to a full stop before anything new can begin. That's my point I want to make here. We're going to go on. He took a towel and he tied it around himself. Now here's where I picked this up. Only after removal, full stop, is one free enough to pick up and act out something new. Now this is where we go south. It's common for us Christian people to attempt to pick up a towel before we come to a full stop. This is common. It's natural. We can't come to a full stop because it's too scary. And so what we naturally do in our Christian context is we pick up a towel that's called Christian and we add it to a well-meaning but self-energized way of thinking. This is what we tend to do. We're naturally good at adding the towel, but we're not so good at subtraction. And the reason we're not good at subtraction is because it's just too scary. It's just too difficult. So he took a towel and he tied it around himself. And so I'm going to give you an illustration of how it works in me. All right. How it works in me is like this. My natural inclination, after years of being a believer in Jesus, still, is to get sucked into the heat of the moment, going toe to toe, fighting fire with fire. I still do it. And because I've got to be right, I've got to defend my very fragile self. And so I tend to get sucked into this really unproductive way of interacting. I've taught myself that while positioned, I've become good at this battle over the years, guys. I've become okay at this. I'm not super good at it, but I've become okay. I've taught myself that while positioned for battle, toe to toe, that I can reach for biblical text because I've spent a fair amount of time in the Bible, so I can find Bible references to support my own bias. And it becomes all about giving out the verse, being right, and about winning at that moment. And it's really losing something. Sad dies. It's really sad that nothing progressive happens. You know, somebody said, if you fight fire with fire, all you get is more fire. But that's what I found. Nobody wins. Yeah. Yeah. I see that hand go, or the finger. I see that finger.
Well, Richard Rohr, whom I enjoy and listen to much, talks about it when you put the Bible in the hands of the untransformed mind, it becomes a weapon.
Yeah.
You know, it's you got a guy who isn't uh, aligned to God's ways, but you've given him this cache of verses that he could throw at people like weapons, and
Yeah. They're like weapons. Yeah.
they
There's a whole
become
book of
weapons.
them.
Yeah, it's a heck of a thing, you know. And he said he would see that often when he was, oddly enough, when he was in seminary, you know, becoming a priest, and people would uh, compete with one another to become bishops and cardinals, and there'd be this pecking order of, like, you know, getting different levels of authority, but they were untransformed. Some of them, they were just the same um, selfish, egotistical people before they got there. Except now they have this trappings of holiness about them. Uh, that's quite unfortunate, and I think that's what you're talking about. It's like, you know, if you don't lay down this old garment before you put the new one on, all you have is you've got the costume of a new garment on top of this old
Yeah.
way of life.
And I've done it for years.
So
Yeah. I was trained to do it, Vince. Yeah. I was trained in my early days to, if someone had an issue, you give them a Bible verse to memorize and a book to read and a report to write. That is how I was trained.
and see me in the morning.
Yeah. Let's make an appointment to get back and you report to me. I mean, that is, and I thought it was normal.
Done it many times.
That heated moment, what I'm invited to understand is that I don't need to go there. The invitation of Jesus is I don't need to go there. I can stop my own stuff. But for me to stop my own stuff, I got to feel safe. Because why would I ever risk vulnerability, transparency, humility if I don't have a safe place to go? God, through Jesus Christ, is that safe place. The challenge is believing it. Only then am I in the frame of mind to pick up the towel. Only after I stop doing my own stuff. Paul expressed the idea when he writes about putting off and putting on, you know, in the epistles. This is a way that this is language that he used, that I think he's talking about the same thing. Something has to be put off first before we can put anything on. The garment must be removed before the towel can be implemented. My challenge, oh, here it is. My challenge is to actually believe it and then do it. And I think we're all in the same boat. On the other hand, if a full stop occurs, I'm then free of myself at that moment to pick up the towel, leaning into the relationship through a humble response of service. Verse 5a, then he poured water into the basin. So what we've seen is a removal of the garment a picking up of the towel, the putting off, the putting on, the full stop, and the picking up. We talked about that. Now, that gives huge illustration or light into what he does next, right here, the pouring of the water in the basin. Now, the life impartation is represented by the pouring water. If you were this audience, guys, this pouring of the water would mean absolute volumes of value. The Jewish people had the mikvah, the place of cleansing, and part of and I've seen several mikvah, and this was a ceremonial washing, and a portion of that, the water it wasn't a tub you just filled and then entered in. There was running water that was brought into that, because running water, pouring water meant moving water, running water, and moving water meant effective water. Through the movement of the water, there is cleansing. It had to be moving water. Jesus called it living water. Living water is moving water. And so in their minds, the pouring of the water in the basement automatically moved to cleansing. There's a cleansing that is about to occur. And then after he did that, he began to wash the disciples' feet with that living water. The known leader washes the disciples' feet. This is contrary, certainly, to how the religious sector treated the people of that day. Here, the tables are reversed. The leader is demonstrated as imparting of life. The greater leader initiates and imparts to the follower, the lesser. Jesus is demonstrating, in doing that, Jesus is demonstrating what God is and has always been like. That's my impart here. I don't think we have a different God in the Old Testament. I think Jesus represents entirely what God has always been like. He is also demonstrating how you and I can treat each other when we are able to let go of our own outer garment in order to pick up the towel of humble service. Only after we feel safe. Jesus wiped them with the towel with which he had tied around himself. In one graphic representation at this Last Supper, Jesus demonstrates what God is like, what he has demonstrated through his ministry, and how he's treated his disciples, how he has treated all, and how his followers can proceed from here. This little demonstration speaks volumes into how we have opportunity to treat each other. Note how he employs the use of the towel, which he has tied around himself. He did it. He made the choice to tie the towel around himself. Not my will, Father, but let thine be done, would be an extreme example of that. He took the towel by choice. This represents conscious choice. The tying of the towel can only happen after a full stop. Full stop provides the power for choice. The wiping of the feet is necessary and quite mundane. It was a very applicable service in the first century. People walked around in sandals, their feet got dusty. And so this was a very necessary, but quite mundane. However, the mundane receives new meaning when followed by full stop. To demonstrate the love of Christ is a day-by-day, moment-by-moment choice that appears through what appears to be mundaneness, but actually gives a fuller and full meaning to our actions. So here's a way of thinking about it. I'm wrapping up here. Actually, it's from John 12, 49 through 50. So it's review. And it's a way to think about this. It's a way to think about what has occurred to each of us in and through Jesus Christ. In the Gospel of John, the writer, John the Apostle, begins with the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God, or is God, rather. Now, this is so different than how we start with spirituality. We tend to start with ourselves, that Jesus did something great for me, and that I accept that. And then I can enter into a freedom and a life. It's person-centered. I'd like to put that idea on its head and flip it around, and let's start the way John starts. He starts with the Word, and the Word represents what is actually true, what is always true, not versus what you and I create in our heads. The Word is what is actually true because God is the author of that Word. The Word became flesh in the person of Jesus of Nazareth in John chapter 1 and verse 14. Out of God's benevolence, love for all of creation, the Word became flesh, and the Word became flesh. So the Logos, the Word in flesh, could demonstrate what we can look like as human beings. And what made Jesus different, and what we are invited into, is that he's working from an entirely different perspective. And that perspective is, I am loved regardless. You and I, in our normal human perspective, we work out of a different grid. And that grid is, I don't measure up. I am less than. And because I am less than, I need to continue to live up to something else that I don't even know what it is. The culture around us has voices. The internal shame and guilt that I create has voices. And I'm constantly in a constraint to do something more to make God love me. That is entirely false. That is what Jesus is demonstrated, is that you and I, as human beings, because we are human, we are loved regardless by God, no matter what. So now I come into it way down the line. It's not a choice. It doesn't start with me, and it doesn't depend on me. It depends on God Almighty and what he's already done. My human propensity is to exist in a hybrid world, which I create in my head. Notice, actually, the word is much larger than this circle. But because of the size of the constraints of the slide, but notice me in my natural state is I tend to dwell on the edge of this. As a Christian, I dwell somewhat in the truth, but I've got a lot of stuff in my head. And that's what I'm calling a hybrid world, which I create. And there are elements of what is true, of course. And there are elements of what is not true. That's what I create. That's why it's hybrid. A portion of me is living in the truth of what truly is. A portion of me is not. The untrue and relentless self-generated voice, I am less than, or I don't measure up, is of human origin and is what I naturally listen to. The outcome of this thinking binds me within my self-created hybrid world. And it's just too unsafe to move out of it. So the good news is, this is the gospel. The good news is that I don't have to live there. I'm invited to lay aside my own garment, what I've created in my head. I can actually let go of what I've created. I don't have to be bound by it. In so doing, I am able to enter into what actually exists. And in what actually exists, there is true life. So we got about 20 minutes to go to table, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. In this session, we examine Jesus's action as an invitation in regard to how we can treat other people. There is, first of all, removal, identified as full stop. There is a new action identified as a picking up of the towel, God's towel. And there is a humble service performed through the picking up, after the picking up that towel, through the act of washing the disciples' feet. 3 major points: full stop first, picking up the towel, and then an act of service towards others. Okay, I really want to hear what you guys have to say. What do you see? What is challenging about this? What are you excited about in regard to this? What questions do you have with what we talked about this morning? The table is yours. The floor is yours, gents.
Well, usually I speak last. Actually, what I was thinking of was, when unlike probably most of you, I became a Christian when I was age 55. And when I became a Christian and I was in that new Christian standpoint, I believe that I was in a better position because God had brought me to a full stop. And one of the things I remember early on, I was actually leading a Bible study where I was trying to say that I was trying to give the point that God's love is unconditional. And there was this actually a guy in the Bible study who was actually a well-regarded a member of the church that the small group was part of. And he started, it actually threw me. He started arguing against the fact that God's love was unconditional. And it was clear that he was actually a legalist, okay? Which I didn't even understand really that much since I was such a new Christian. And that actually, it broke up the small group because of this conflict. Because I think most of the people in the group agreed with me, but they didn't want they didn't want to, go up against this guy who was arguing that that God's love is unconditional. You got to do this, you got to do that, whatever kind of a thing. Anyway, I just thought that was an example. And another example was about 5 or 6 years later, when I was still somewhat new. We were out off in Maui, approaching, helping my brother with because his business was in trouble, and it was actually the first time my brothers and I were together as Christians, because I was the last one in the fold. But anyway, I was cleaning out the back, and I found actually 2 urns of ashes that were back there in this house that my brother had his workshop in. And anyway, my middle brother and his wife said, "Oh, that's probably, because they were probably from this the Shintoist or whatever religion that these people were, and they threw it in the garbage."
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And so my youngest brother, who was actually the one that was connected to those auntie and uncle, he went crazy, and I'm going, holy smokes. So, what's going on here? Okay. So there was a question there where they were kind of, my middle brother and his wife were being kind of legalistic. And so then I, as the new Christian, kind of stepped in. I said, well, so I said, we ought to go, and when we dump the garbage, we ought to try to find this stuff. So we were driving up to the garbage dump, and my youngest brother starts relating about how, he was actually asked to give the eulogy at this whatever Buddhist, or I can't even remember what the temple was that that his aunt and uncle went to, but he gave the eulogies for both of them. I went up there, and because of his love for them. Okay. So anyway, it was an experience. We were up there in the garbage dump, and the birds are flying around and diving at us and whatever as we're digging through the garbage and whatever. And then as what we did was we recovered them, and we went back to that temple, and my brother brought it in there and gave it to the priest. So to me, that was a tremendous, actually lesson to me about being, both of those were very lessons about me of trying to present, to be legalistic. But then I found myself, as I went through my journey, I started to get to be self-centered, to where, it was getting to be kind of a good works kind of a thing that I'm doing to try to earn things, instead of that, unconditional thing that I had in my early Christianity. So I think that's something that, at least me as an individual, as I go through my walk, I tended to go from that, pure and correct type of acceptance of Jesus, and started trying to earn his love and earn my salvation, kind of. Anyway, went on too long.
So I think if I can, your 2 stories, what they represent, you early on, you were trying to express to the group the unconditional love of God, and you've got a negative feedback, you've got pushback, which, that fella, there are plenty biblical texts that point to the conditional, that God is conditional. So that really puts us into a whole nother discussion. What do we do with that? And then I think you said that this whole idea of what you call legalism, there's kind of like two parts of it. One is I've got to do things to keep God's wrath, even though I know Jesus is somehow in the picture, it gets all messed up where I have to do things to, so God's not torqued off at me. Or the other way is I've got to do things to please him, to make him happy with me. The both are a type of human-centered action that we all do. You're not alone, Tatsi. I mean, I think we all have it. We all have examples of that. So, what do some of the rest of you say about either Tatsi's comment or other thoughts about this?
I think, Mike, and you all, for me, the challenge
The
is
challenge for me, Mike, is
Ooh.
I can do an action in service to others, like Christ was doing here. And the, not the outcome, but the blessing is dependent upon my attitude. Am I doing this, one, to either earn God's favor or to look good in the eyes of the person that I am serving? Or am I doing it because I first stopped and said, God loves me so much that I should serve this person in whatever way that is? And for me, that's the struggle. I have to go, yes, I want to do this. I want to serve this. So what is my motivation? Is my motivation to love this person because I realize how much God loved me, so this becomes an act of love, an act of service for somebody else? Or am I going, in my mind, I need to do this so that God will look with favor on me, or this person will look for favor on me? And the service is the same. The result could be the same, but the blessing for me in my life will not be the same unless I have done it out of an act of love or an act of service.
Thanks, Jeff. You'll hold that comment, but I think Steve, you had something you were going to say.
Yeah, I think it ties in with what you've said, Jeff. A couple of things. You know, there's sort of as a step of faith, I think, at the full stop, to sort of transfer from knowing sort of cognitively that I'm fully loved to taking the risk of then loving others, or laying down my need to be right or whatever it is, to take that risk in a sense of washing feet, not knowing how it will be received, or not knowing, in a sense, the risk that I might be giving of myself sacrificially, and there might not be a return for me.
Right.
And so, that I'd like to get where sort of pure love and self-gratification, where those two things are really binary, if you will, where I can jump across the line and say, there's nothing of myself in doing this act of service and washing feet. I'm totally doing it out of love. But I'm not very binary in that. And oftentimes I can maybe start with the feeling of love, but then self comes up and says, gratify me. Hopefully, in doing this, I'm going to get some accolades. I'm going to get some attaboys, some pats on the back.
Yeah.
And I guess that's sort of the struggle that I fear. or the struggle that I battle with in this. I know where you're going, Mike. But boy, I only get there with great imperfection.
Even the observer, I think Peter in this record says that you can't do that to me. I mean, you're the master. You don't take a servant's role. The observer looks upon the action as a diminishing of your stature in some crazy way. We see it in modern culture. Who bows to the leader of another country, or who shakes the hand first. You're being submissive, you should be not submissive. I mean, you got all these crazy things that living in the world brings to the forefront of your mind that should not be there. The word of God should be the teacher. And, like Jeff said, that you recognize how much you've been given. You recognize that the love God has for you is without measure. And so you do a selfless act without wondering about the visual, the optics of the whole thing. But that's not what happens, unfortunately. It's a challenge. It definitely is.
So I got a question for all of us. When you and I arrive at that place of full stop, that several of you have mentioned that idea of full stop, where you can catch yourself saying, hey, I'm myself's involved with this. I'm trying to defend myself. I'm trying to be right. And you're able to catch yourself and you stop. Can any of you describe what that feels like? What happens to you internally, if anything, when that occurs?
I'll do it better next time, is generally. I try not to wallow in it, make it worse, but I recognize that didn't go as well as I thought it would, or I wanted it to. I'll do it better next time.
Okay, so to me, that means you're able to give yourself some slack here. Just, hey, silly Vince, silly Mike. Yeah.
We all have lived long enough to know that to do anything but that is just too crippling. If every mistake you make, if every wrong turn you do, if every time you miss the mark, you condemn yourself.
Oh, it's horrible.
You'll never get up out of bed. It's just too much.
It's just too much. Yeah. We'll go into hiding. We'll manufacture a Christian life that we can live in, because to face it is just too difficult.
I'd rather leave the feet dirty. I don't want to do it wrong.
Right.
I mean, at least you're giving it a shot. I know the symbolism of this whole thing of Jesus taking the role of a servant, and that would normally be what a servant would do as you welcome people into your house. And he was showing, some renderings of this as, I'm going to be the servant position here. And he knows that he's the Lord, and so certainly not the servant, but he was taking the position of a servant as an example of, we need to be all things to all people, like, Paul said. So, but the disciples were not out of that mindset. It's like, you got a position, you're the head dog, you don't do this stuff. We got people for this.
Yeah.
He goes, well, yeah, we do. It's me. I'm the people. You're the people. You go out there and do the same stuff. This isn't what you think it is.
Yeah.
We sometimes try to include the thought process that in a situation, a task, a request, whatever I'm faced with. In a spiritual context, I try to ask, is this a good thing or a God thing? Because there's a difference. And sometimes, given our limitations, I think particularly in my case, as I get older, energy level, all these kinds of things, doing good things is not bad, but doing godly things is better. And sometimes I have the choice of going one of those two directions. And to do the godly, that's where you have to come to the full stop and say, well, this is good, but this is godly. So I think I'll go here instead of here. So that's a poor explanation of the process, but it's involved with what you're talking about.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Yeah.
So, for me, what I experienced was when I used to do so-called whatever acts or whatever I was thought that was brought before me, I went back to my initial experience of being born again. Okay, in terms of dying to my sins, which majorly were self-centered type of thing, to where I, was born again into the power of having Jesus do those things for me. And initially, I think that's why in my early journey, I was a lot more effective. And then as I went over the years and whatever, I stopped doing that and started doing it again under my own power. So what I found is, now that I'm later on in my Christian walk, I need to go back to the beginning, be born again. When I have these opportunities to serve before me, I need to go ahead and be born again in the power of Jesus. And that also helps me to renew my faith in Christ.
Yeah. Kind of a over and over and over and over every point, every time.
Mike,
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. Somebody go, John. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I mean, this was a full stop for the disciples at the Passover meal, where Jesus demonstrates servant leadership, and they had been arguing who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom, blah, 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 right? And he says, time out, and then you've talked a lot about people-centered, person-centered, our faith journey, which almost all the bents are person, it's about me and my journey and my faith journey, versus God-centered. Dave was talking about that too a little bit, trying to see the bigger picture. But do you think Jesus made everybody feel safe?
No. Not automatically and initially.
What, Mike, what do you think about that?
It's a great question. My feeling, it was not Jesus's intent to make people feel safe, but he spoke the truth of the Father. And if people could let go of their own self-created constructs, they could actually enter safety. Rich young ruler would be a great example. I don't think Jesus spoke words that were pushy kinds of things to accommodate his lifestyle. Jesus was not into accommodating other people so they would feel comfortable where they were, safe. But he was there to speak the truth. The most difficulty he had was with the religious sector, because the religious sector had built in their heads what this should be like. And anything contrary to that, they would buck the system. Jesus was,
the oft quoted dialogue about Aslan in C.S. Lewis's writing, where the question is asked of Aslan, is he safe? And the answer that he's given is, no, he's not safe, but he's good.
I bet you Mike doesn't like that.
yeah, thank you, David, but I think there is, I've known that for quite some time, and I love C.S. Lewis, but I think it builds, what do we do with that kind of question? Because I think I think that we as Christians, we tend to dwell with this idea of God that really puts me into a place of unknowing, and of unknowing of I don't feel safe. And I think everybody lands somewhere, Dave. And I'm landing on the idea. I think that God's intention through Jesus Christ is to provide that place of safety. And the difficulty is believing it. So
Perfect love casts out fear. Yeah. Getting to the belief to rest in that.
Yeah.
Is another thing, at least it is for me. I'll own that.
Yeah, it really is. And I think we're all on a journey on it. I cut my teeth, Tatsi, on the idea, is God's love conditional or unconditional? When I was in class, we would talk about it because you can find biblical text both ways. And, well-meaning people arguing in both directions. But from my perspective, I have to land somewhere. We would call it, well, we'll never know, it's mystery. I don't think it is mystery at this age, at 69. I think God's love is absolutely unconditional, and that we have manufactured what we think God is like. We need judgment, he doesn't. And I think that is where the rub is, that we put ourselves in this constraint, and Jesus, his message, the good news is that you guys don't have to live there. So, what we do with that, I really think it's just very difficult, Christian or not, to accept the fact that I am loved regardless. And to the degree that I can is the degree by which I think it will change our lives. At that moment when I let go of me, I want to believe that God's presence is there to animate me into a direction that would be representative of Jesus Christ if he were here. I'm not Jesus, you're not Jesus, but we are certainly called to follow him. Yeah. I don't know, we all land somewhere. Fellas, it's 8:05 and great questions by you guys. Thank you for all your comments. And we will not be meeting next week due to, I've got camp next week, but it'll be August 2nd when we get back together again, and we'll pick up in John on verse 6, and we'll move from here. So have a great day, guys, and have a good week. See you in a couple weeks. Bye for now.
Thanks, Mike.